going to get us kicked off. So let me just hit record. Perfect. So hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today as we are honored to have these amazing women from CNN come share their stories and talk about creating a legacy in tech. And so, whether this is your first or your 50th Chat and Learn, welcome and hello on this wonderful Tuesday. It can get hard to keep track of the days, being stuck inside, but I'm happy to have you all here. And, just a couple housekeeping things before we get started. We love to have interactive conversations here. So, feel free to turn your cameras on, come off of mute at any time. We really just want to make this a conversation. I know that Katie and Kim probably will share in that as well. So, feel free to ask your questions at any point and really jump in on the conversation. But also, I just wanted to shout out that, we are streaming this and we are recording this. So if you do end up coming off of mute, just wanted to make everyone aware that you will show up in the recording. And, at any time, if you want to ask a question, want to make a comment, and you don't feel comfortable coming off of mute, that's okay too. And we totally understand. So, feel free to write in the chat. And if there's anything that you would like to ask anonymously or comment anonymously, you can write to me privately and I can, pose that as an anonymous question. And as I said, this is being recorded, so we will send an email with the link afterwards. And keep up with us on socials. You can keep up with what we're doing and all the different amazing chats that we have with awesome women sharing their stories. You can follow us at Power to Fly on all of our social accounts, and then subscribe to our YouTube channel as we are live streaming all of our Chat and Learns now. And I see Angie turned on her camera. So hello, Angie. So lovely to see you. Perfect. And so with that, I'm really excited to kick it off to our first speaker, Kim. Kim, who is a technical manager for CNN Consumer Apps. And so I am going to hand it off to you to let you, dive a little bit more into about yourself and give a brief introduction. And then I'll hand it over to Katie.
Thanks. I'm Kim Bostic. And like I said, shout out to my daughter, Sonia Bostic, who's joining from Texas. So I started my career the day before 9/11, and I'll always remember that day. So my second day of orientation at Hewitt Associates was 9/11. So it's been about 19 years that I've been in technology. My first job was in QA for Hewitt Aon. And since then, I've moved from QA to SDAT to development to manager. And that's pretty much been my journey. I indulge a lot in hobbies, artistic. I wish I could decorate. I don't decorate very well, obviously. That's why I just have this random picture. But my life is my kids and volunteering and working. I work a lot. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell. The rest of the stuff you can read on the screen.
Perfect. Thank you. Yes,
I appreciate it.
Thank you for being here. And I think that's the beauty of these virtual backgrounds nowadays. You really don't have to be an interior designer, depending on how I'm feeling the day, I switch it out to make it look a little bit better. And so that is the awesomeness of technology. And then I'm going to pass it to Katie, who is a technical manager for CNN Consumer Apps.
Hey, so I'm actually not a technical manager. I'm a delivery leader. So I'm actually in the project management vertical. All good. The technical manager is definitely Kim. My area of expertise, delivery, agile, scrum master, agile coach. And I've been in the industry for 10 years. I started off as a project coordinator and worked my way through data science, data analyst. I did that for a couple of years, and then I did sales as well. So I got a really good feel for every aspect of the industry and everything that goes into it, from somebody even coming through the door for interviewing all the way to working with them side by side. And then what else? I've been a part of the fintech industry, now the news, and I've been part of ad tech, which has been really an interesting ride as well. I graduated from Mercer, and I actually wanted to be a doctor. I wanted to be an orthopedic surgeon. And then quickly found out how bad I am at math. And so I could not hack it in that area. So medical illustration and art is actually like my huge love. And so is music. So I collect a lot of vinyl. I love jazz, all different types. And I have 2 dogs that I am obsessed with. And Kim and everybody else on the call who's from CNN hears them snore all day. So they are actually underneath my feet right now. So that is me in a nutshell.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And thank you for being here. And please excuse me for saying the wrong title. I got a little bit nervous there reading
all
them. So
good.
thank you. Thanks everyone for all of your patience. And so with that, follow CNN on Power to Fly. They have a company page, and I will drop the link in the chat so you can go ahead and click on that and check out their different events and their job openings that they have. And so, without further ado, let's get right into these questions. We have some pre-submitted questions here that the audience submitted prior. That's why I said prior to the chat. But as I said, at any point, if you want to ask a question, follow up on anything, please feel free to either come off of mute or write in the chat. And so with that, let's get started talking about how you both feel that you've played a part in enhancing diversity efforts at CNN. And so whoever wants to kick it off, go right ahead.
All right, I'll start. So one of the awesome things about being in the project management delivery vertical at CNN Digital, specifically for us, it's core news, is that our specific community for project management and delivery is extremely inclusive, and it is also a very empathetic and emotionally intelligent group. And so we make time to talk about the tough things. We give space to ourselves, and we have a diversity committee, and it's actually called Continuing the Conversation, where all of us come together, and it's not something that's ever recorded because it's extremely raw and it's extremely emotional and it's really close hitting to people's hearts. And we actually talk through experience in real life and the tough lessons that come with that and what we take from it and what we can actually displace back out into our community that we directly affect. So whether that's the team level or that's actually at the organizational level as a whole. And then our group gives us a lot of town halls, AMAs. I know Kim's a part of culture committees, and I'm sure she'll touch on that, but she has a direct impact and influence in that regard. So for us, it's whenever we're given these opportunities to speak up, it's our due diligence to do so by asking the tough questions to our leadership, because they welcome the transparency and the difficult conversations.
For me, how I play a part in impacting diversity at CNN, it's kind of in 2 different ways, like high level ways. One is creating space for diversity of thought. And what that looks like is, because I think when we talk about diversity and inclusion, we also we look at the things that are kind of surface and superficial, which are important. But we also forget about diversity of thought and the diversity in culture, which has a lot to do with diversity in thought. And so on the teams that I lead and have led both on before and after I came to CNN, I try to create a space for diversity of thought. That's a really big thing in technology because it oftentimes leads to innovation. Sometimes you have like the 2 quietest people in a room of 15 or 20, and they're not speaking, not because they don't have great ideas or they won't be the next, VP or CTO of a company, but it's because the space isn't created for them. And so what I try to be mindful about is creating space for diversity of thought so that the quietest person in the room or the person that is least likely to speak is either called upon or privately encouraged so that we can get ourselves accustomed to hearing something different. And then the second thing is removing barriers from my own implicit biases. I think, again, when we talk about diversity and inclusion, it seems like a one-way type of conversation and perspective, like what is the company doing to improve diversity and inclusion? And I think we all have to ask ourselves, what am I doing to improve how I think about diversity and implicit biases, not necessarily how I react to them being placed upon me, but also how I remove those things from myself, right? And so one of those ways that I try to remove my own implicit biases is kind of asking like the why behind, especially my default responses. Anytime you or I just immediately say no or immediately say yes, I think we owe it to ourselves from a diversity and inclusion perspective to ask ourselves, why did we default to that question? Was it the person that we were responding to? And I think the answer why leads us to exposing any barriers that need to be removed, be it from diversity and inclusion, or either just a deepening in rapport with those relationships. And then as you ask yourself those questions about your own implicit biases related to diversity and inclusion, I think you owe it to yourself to begin to create markers in your own behaviors, and trends and themes in your own behaviors, so that as you are correcting and improving how you approach and guard against your own biases, I think to that degree is the same degree in which you'll be able to help others and help a company navigate through diversity and inclusion. So I think it starts with yourself first, so that you can effectively communicate with your company, with your manager, and with your peers about diversity and inclusion.
I couldn't agree more. I think there's so much work being done around diversity and inclusion today, and a lot of, sometimes it feels like reactiveness, right? Or, like, what happened? Okay, how can I react to this? Instead of, taking a step back, like you're saying, and thinking about what you're doing and how are you moving in your relationships, in your community, and the things that you're doing outside of that reactiveness to foment more change beyond, that initial response. And, I wanted to ask you both, as you're talking about these different initiatives, have you seen more people gravitate towards these now and sort of lean on these internally, as there's a lot of stuff happening in the world, the pandemic, social injustice that's happening in the world? Are you feeling that people are leaning more on those internally?
When you say leaning more on those, what are those?
Yeah, I guess the continuing the conversation, are you finding that more people are joining in on those? Or I'm not exactly sure how it's structured, so trying to choose words carefully.
Okay. I think it's probably a little bit different being at CNN than being at another company, because we have to face every single day inside of our app, on the web, like news about diversity and inclusion. And we have this like second civil rights movement that has begun to develop since the first of the year. And so in a way, it forces us to have conversations that other companies don't have. And I think that's the amazing benefit of working at CNN, is because the things that most of the world tries to hide from and run from, by the very nature of our business, we have to confront them in the news. And so it makes it very easy for us to, or it makes the conversation, I guess, more normal or expected in our world. So it's a little bit different, I suppose, at CNN than, well, I know it's very different because I came from Home Depot and a couple other large enterprises, and it's not the same, which is good.
And I'll piggyback off of that. So the continuing the conversation group actually stemmed from these social injustices, and as Kim said, this emergence of a civil rights movement mentality, and we're leaning on that because we're using it as a platform to learn and to grow and to be better humans and shape a culture to how we want to be treated and how we want to respect everyone, and to put inclusivity and the person at the forefront, as opposed to us always feeling like we come second to the business initiative, right? That's really, really important, is that we feel valued as an individual, then as a contributor and a part of the collective. And when we're having these collective conversations, it's a perfect time for us to be vulnerable and to put ourselves in situations where we don't think day in and day out how a certain coworker may feel or how they feel as a person. But this is a perfect learning opportunity to grow side by side and shape the future, because we have a moral imperative to shape what we have right now in front of us, right, in our hands, in our grasp, for the younger and future generations to come. Because if we leave the now for later, we're only making it worse. And I think that Kim and I fully believe that we always should leave a place better than when we first got to it. And if that means that we're having these collective conversations and we're having town halls that display that diversity and those different narratives, our whole becomes stronger. And so, yeah, we are leaning on this, and we're using all of these events that are going on to our benefit. And we're really lucky about that, because we have leaders who have open door policy. So when things are bothering us, or things that are glaring problems that we see that are only becoming chasms in the workplace, we can do skip levels. We can ask the questions either anonymously or directly to their face, because they leave that space open for us. The floor is open, and what we do with it is our choice. So we are autonomous, but we're really, really trying to make it a better place.
I love everything you're saying. It's, oh my gosh, it's so important now more than ever. And especially, I love if we leave the now for the later, it's only going to get worse, because it is. And we're seeing it happen, that it's only getting worse. And so, so thank you for saying that and chiming in there.
I wanted to give a shout out to Patty Hirsch. She's our EVP for digital, and also Melissa Kohler. I will say that, like, when we talk about things like an open door policy and the things that we're saying, I mean, those are lived out through some of the things that both Melissa and Patty do, right? Melissa and Power to Fly, like our relationship with Power to Fly is kind of like evidence of the things that Katie mentioned, because I think a lot of companies just kind of give you lip service and there's no really fruit of what it is they say or impact. And so I think our relationship with Power to Fly is amazing. The open door policy is literally open door. Patty has set up office hours where anyone can join, right? And that's pretty rare at large companies, where executives they'll say there's an open door policy, but you don't quite see the processes and a way to actually connect with those people. And so I appreciate a lot of the women, all of the women at CNN and leadership, because they not just say those things and do those things, but they create space for you to access them. And so I think that that's a humongous difference between CNN and a lot of the other companies, especially of this size that I've worked for. You don't really have access to people. And if you don't have access, then it reduces your opportunity and it minimizes your voice. So yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And I think especially at this time, that's what we need more than ever, right? Access to these people that we work with, and especially our leaders, to be able to have these conversations and bring up these feelings that we have when you have so much happening in the world. And there's a lot going on. I saw something today that was like, even if you don't have coronavirus, this is what's happening with your body, even from like waking up and having, with a clenched jaw, because we're just stressed, or, eternal headaches that never end, because we have a lot of weight on our shoulders from everything happening. So thank you for bringing that up. And so moving on to the next question, what are some of the common obstacles you've had to face as women in tech, and how did you overcome them?
Well, there's been quite a few. One obstacle I think that a lot of people will face at some point in their career is a shifting of the market. It could be, for me, it was a digital transformation. Between agile and waterfall and RUP, and how teams are structured from a technology standpoint, it's ever changing. And sometimes those changes impact the demand. And so one of my biggest challenges was a change in that demand from manual QA to automation QA to automation being owned by development. You know, at a couple of companies, I've experienced that type of digital transformation, but it really hit me hard when I was at Home Depot, where I was a QA lead. And I knew a little bit of automation and learned Selenium and a little bit of Java, but the organization was quickly headed towards a digital transformation that would have displaced possibly some manual QA people at Home Depot. And about 2 years before that digital transformation, and this leads me to the second obstacle and how I overcame it, was about 2 years before that happened, my director, who ended up being the chief of technology, chief of staff for the CTO at Home Depot, Matt McKinney, he had like the vision and the foresight enough to kind of pluck out a few high performers from the QA group and begin to invest time into us and learning programming. So that's when I learned Java. And so that obstacle was, I think it was I first overcame it by being flexible enough to learn something new and accept the trend and the change in the market. And then also, I guess before that even happened, was kind of proving that I am dependable, I do good work, I can be trusted. And with those things, you know, I just could not be more thankful to Matt McKinney at Home Depot 2 jobs ago for using the market and his budget to build in the skill set and revamping the skill set for a lot of QA people. So that was a great opportunity and it was a big shift, but advocacy from executive leadership. And that's a lot difficult to do at other companies. At CNN, like I just mentioned, that advocacy and that access and those opportunities are kind of already built in because you do have, you know, women and people of all genders and colors and cultures interested in hearing what everyone has to say. And so that is a lot difficult at other companies, but it's still important. It's just a lot easier at CNN because we do live by open book policy. And our leaders seek, they create space to hear from people that don't normally step up, you know, which is important. So yeah, those were my 2 obstacles, digital transformation and then executive leadership and advocacy so that I could be helped along in that because I didn't do it by myself. Sorry, that was so long.
Okay. All right. So from my side, I think this is like a 3-part answer, I guess, and I'll try to keep it succinct. I think one of the obstacles that I have faced early on is being one of the youngest faces or voices at a table, and there hasn't been support in that regard. And so you may come to the table with fresh perspective and a sense of community, camaraderie, making effective change, but there's not a lot of people to put their stock and faith into you. And so you're not taken seriously. And then there's also times where there, in my career, have been an unspoken competition amongst peers to be the best one, right? And so instead of fostering the people around you, there have been people who've tried to cut you down because they see the brand that you're building for yourself and they don't like that they're not a part of it or they're not doing enough for that. So there's that unspoken competition. And then also there's another part of this where there's a legacy mindset and a culture that comes along with working for enterprise companies, which you don't typically see in startups because that mindset is so fresh and it's so blank. But at legacy companies, you'll see oftentimes that there are men who like to put down women because of the actual culture that they come from, which is generations old of top down. And so we face that often, especially in delivery and project management. If we're going to be very, very candid in this conversation, a lot of times people in our position, both men and women, are treated as glorified scribes, or that we're admin assistants, that we don't have a good perspective, that just because we're functional doesn't mean that we are allowed to contribute to a technical conversation. But when we pull ourselves back and we realize this is about a product and about ROI and making the business go in the direction that it needs to go, that's when we have to recognize someone for their value and their worth, and that every voice is truly powerful and belongs at that table if they've been there and selected to be there. I have faced numerous people who have tried to sequester me into that small box of, you're just project, you're functional, you don't know what you're talking about. And it's what we do with those experiences that shape us and how we can thrive and continue to stay with our value system and not diminish ourselves and our worth and our value. Because if we start to diminish ourselves, then we're giving the power back to everybody else. And you cannot do that, especially as a woman in the working force. You have got to fight tooth and nail at every angle and every corner to make sure that you're valued and that you're equal. And I don't know anybody in our industry, especially in project and delivery and in as being a scrum master, who hasn't felt like someone's trying to treat them like a doormat, because that's typically what that legacy inherited culture, right, is stemming from, right? So those have been obstacles. And I'm sure that anybody at any different age would tell you, yeah, they faced lack of support. Yes, they have faced being the youngest person in the room and not feeling the strength and credibility to speak up, or that they have someone for the backing. And then there is, when you're trying to build your brand and your own identity, there are always going to be people who are trying to tear you down, and you just have to make sure that you are sticking to your value system and sticking to your guns. Never diminish yourself for others.
Yes, yes, yes. And you are getting tons of praise in the chat for everything that you said. You know, just some comments that are coming in. Yes, Katie, spot on, Katie. Somebody said gets very exhausting fighting for that spot at the table, but keep on fighting for it. Somebody said that they see that a lot of that in legacy, and that somebody else commented that they've seen that in startups too, since it's usually a mostly male team early on. I'm feeling really privileged when I get on these chats and just unfortunately get to hear about some of the experiences that people have had, because at Power to Fly, we're like 95% women. And so it's a totally different experience. And it's just really interesting for me to get to see and hear these honestly horror stories. So thanks for sharing that. And somebody said, I've been in legacy for 20 plus years and have seen little change. So keep on fighting the good fight. And so, you know, talking about this, what's your advice for confronting racial cultural bias in the workplace? And how would you bring up these concerns to your manager? And I'll kick it off to Katie first.
All right. So, advice for confronting racial cultural bias in the workplace. So, I'm a big fan of finding your tribe, right? So, again, I speak from experience in a very functional capacity. And so there's always been communities, right? Fostering communities. So we're really lucky in that regard for project management, delivery, Scrum. And so a lot of times when we're uncomfortable about things, we actually bounce things off of one another in those groups. And seeking advice from other people's perspectives on maybe what they have experienced, and it can come from a logical, pragmatic approach as opposed to a very emotionally fueled and driven conversation, right? That's one way that you can confront racial and cultural bias in the workplace, is by going to a community that fosters the same belief system as you. And if there isn't one, you can start one, right? That is always an option, to find like-minded individuals. And then having those open conversations and keeping that dialogue open. If you ever see a terrible interaction between two people and you just can't stomach it or sit by, you have to be willing to forego your ego and know that you're going to take some lumps and bruises along the way. So by using yourself as a human shield, or by interjecting in the conversation and saying, hey, I don't think this is constructive conversation at all. I think this is actually deconstructive for everybody in the room. And I don't think that this is appropriate for right now. Let's table that and we can talk about it later in a one-on-one, or, let's talk about this with the appropriate management or HR. You have to be willing to be out of the box in an uncomfortable position in order to make a difference sometimes in a very quick instance. So if you're in people management, that's one of the biggest jobs that you have, is not only coaching, but also dealing with the inner workings of the individual. And with CNN, again, I'll go back to the continuing the conversation group. That stemmed from a group of people who wanted so passionately to eradicate this ignorance amongst our group of what others go through day in and day out and how it truly affects them. And even using very neutral vanilla words actually do contribute to keeping things in that legacy view. And by putting yourself out of your comfort zone, you'll be able to confront those better. But yeah, it's about putting yourself in other people's shoes, having the tough conversations, and being open to taking the lumps along the way. Because if it's worth it and it's for the health of the group overall, if you're seeing bad behavior and you're not seeing anyone else do anything about it, my gut reaction is to do something about it. We're not a group that stands idle at CNN, specifically delivery and project management. We're an extremely strong group, and we like to foster that.
I echo everything Katie said. Confronting cultural bias in the workplace is difficult. So in addition to the things that Katie mentioned, I think a key component for everyone is to assess the job that you take, right? And so look at the company and assess whether or not their beliefs about diversity and inclusion align with you or the type of company you want to work for. 9 times out of 10, if you feel that that is a priority and you make that a priority with the company that you select to work for, then it'll decrease the amount of times you have to, vigilantly confront things that make you uncomfortable. So I think the first thing to do is just make sure that you choose the company that's right for you without allowing salary, title, and some of these other superficial things that we also want that are also really good to be a barrier to your day-to-day happiness. And so if you make X amount of dollars or have this title, is that worth being at a company that you have to consistently feel like you're on the battlefield, helping to fight the good fight of racial and cultural bias? So for me, I would think that I would encourage everyone to look at the company first and see how it aligns with where you are. And then, like Katie mentioned, connect with others, but also give people a benefit of the doubt and be compassionate, because most times or oftentimes at work, ignorance does not equal evil, right? And so it doesn't, because someone doesn't know something, I mean ignorance in the definition of just not knowing, that can be perceived, or the actions of ignorance from a diversity and cultural perspective, that can be perceived as mean or with negative intent. Sometimes the intent does not matter depending upon what you're dealing with, but from a benefit of the doubt perspective, most times ignorance is not rooted in evil or meanness. You just have to process things in the way that you process them best, and give benefit of the doubt wherever, and compassion wherever you can, because of course we want those same things from our coworkers.
Definitely. And I think, another thing to throw in that's important here is getting comfortable with the uncomfortable and getting comfortable with not knowing things, so that, if you are just ignorant, you can also say, I'm sorry, I didn't know that, or I didn't realize that, because I think that's a really important part of these diversity conversations as well, right? Because I think it can inevitably be just easy to be like, oh, I just didn't know that, And
Right.
while that's valid, right? And it's fair to grow and it's really important to learn. It's also important to be open to that and to understand that, you know, things that we say and things that we do have consequences for people and the way that they feel in the workplace. So thank you both for bringing that up. And I can definitely feel the strength from both of you and how you handle all of this. And it's definitely, you know, it's beaming through both of you. And so Angie chimed in here and said, and don't be afraid to go to HR. And Tanuja said, utilize all amenities that a company offers in employee support. So just wanted to shout that out. So thank you for everyone for chiming in the chat. And so let's kick it off with Kim for this question. How do you bring empathy and trust to a company that hasn't quite bought into the value of focusing on those elements?
That's pretty difficult. I think the way we bring empathy and trust in those situations, it really depends upon the person and what your strengths are and what your level of tenacity is. And it really depends. But for me, I try to stay as resilient as I can during the company's, I guess, phase of growth or maturation in the area of maturity. And then what's most difficult that I try to keep top of mind, I'm not perfect at it, and I don't even get it right all of the time, is doing things because it's right and not because it makes me feel good, or because it's timely. So what that might look like is, I really learned this from my husband, to be specific. It's like in the face of not being believed or not being trusted as a woman or as a technical thought leader, in the face of that at work, the question is like, how do I respond to that? And sometimes it feels good to respond, to lash out, and that may be necessary in a very professional way. But oftentimes what one has to do is just kind of, I think what Katie mentioned also, is remove ego and pride, go heads down, get the work done, and try to figure out how you can continue to be an example of what it is you need. How can I give out of what I need? That doesn't work all the time, but I would rather that be my first thing on my to-do list than it be my last. And then champion EQ, emotional intelligence, when it comes to your recruiting and your interview pipeline. And so where I might not be able to influence my team or my peers or my leaders when it comes to empathy, I might just have to be patient as they are patient with me in other areas. I can then begin to volunteer for different portions of interviewing, like the behavioral section or portion of our interviewing, so that I can champion that. At least I would have some type of like solace in knowing that I've asked the right questions of the next candidate that could be my coworker in the area of empathy. And so that's really helpful. And then when it comes to bringing empathy and trust to a company that hasn't quite, bought into that value, I think it's important that you catalog the things that you do along those lines of empathy and trust. And then align those things with key results, mission statements, and visions, so that you have solid examples of how you've contributed to make the culture better. And I think that kind of highlights it to your manager, and managers always need help with yearly reviews. But I think that it's important for you to see who you are and see what your contributions are, so that no one can ever make you feel that you're not contributing. But aligning those with mission statements and key results really, really help, because it helps your manager immediately see, the value that you bring to everyone.
So a lot of what Kim said, I think just rings true, right? Like there's so much that she said that covers bringing empathy and trust into a place that hasn't actually formally adopted it. I look at it coming from an experience of enterprise and startup mixture in my background, is that a lot of times when you're working either in top down or in a small environment that's heavily driven on meeting metrics and getting more investors and trying to push the product out by any means necessary, it starts at a grassroots level, right? Like, it's about team, and it's about what you can do to build the trust relationship at that small, fundamental, foundational level. And then it's the one-on-ones, and it's the actual team development, and it's the team self-efficiency and sufficiency that you're bolstering, and you're actually, showing people how to treat one another in that group setting and in uncomfortable situations during ceremonies that actually build, right, upon that, for empathy and trust to grow in areas where there's not really a whole lot of oxygen for something to breathe, right? So injecting that, because that's your value system that you bring each day through the front door, is that your value system is built off of the emotional intelligence, that EQ, the empathy, and then being able to have the intuition, understanding people's body language and going about it as neutral as possible, as pragmatic as possible, where opening the floor for dialogue. And when we're going too fast, slow down so that way people can catch up. Giving information as a whole and not as partial narrative is extremely important when we're talking about being successful and bringing empathy and trust into areas that don't have it yet. Because when you give only partial narratives, you're not giving people the due credit and not building that trust on their side. So eventually that comes to light. People are people, and they're very perceptive, and you have to treat them as such. You can't just treat someone as though they're a number, a part of the machine, right? Because if we go about things mechanically, then you're going to have burnout, you're going to have a lot of waste, and you're going to find that people are going to be really, really miserable and cranky. And that is not an environment that anybody wants to be a part of, right? So a lot of it, I think, stems from who you are, how, as Kim said, which was so aptly put, how can I use my influence to get what I need or want for the betterment of the whole, right? It's not just about what I want, it's what I need to happen. So that way it's healthier overall. And you have to find a way to start at the very most basic level and then have it seep and grow and find its way into different pockets.
Yes, and I love that Kim brought that up about being a part of the interviewing process, because it just seems like something that you wouldn't really think about, but that can have a really big impact because of the people that you're bringing into the organization and that are becoming your coworkers, and being able to kind of scope them out. So thank you for that, because I think it's always really helpful when talking about big ideas like this to have actionable steps that we can take or things that we can take away and think about for the future. And so, as there's so many difficulties facing women in tech, what has kept you in the tech field as you see other women leaving the industry? And I will kick it to Katie first, as I see her smiling.
So this one's pretty close to my heart. I will tell you that. It's not an easy industry. It's not for the faint of heart. And I think one of the things that we should focus on is that the longer we stay in one field or in one place, the more insight we gain into like gender and social inequalities. There is, again, I'll go back to it, the imperative that I feel, that responsibility to future employees and overall workplace health, for us to leave like lasting positive impacts in our wake. So I'm passionate about fostering a communal, shared sense of empathy and intuition, and I've had experience, very successful experience, spanning from that team level to larger parts of the organization for coaching, for agile coaching, and being Scrum Master for other teams outside of my own to foster that platform, right, for everybody who doesn't feel like they fit into our area, or they haven't really found their footing, it's that you got to keep at it. And when you're that younger person, it's really hard to see. But when you gain more exposure and you gain more experience along the way, it's easier to find it within yourself and in your value system to stay at the table, share your experiences and your learnings, and where you're coming from in them, and then use your platform, use your influence for that future landscape. Because not only does that affect you going forward, but then the wake that you leave, that also has ripple effects, right? So it's really, really important that what we learn, we continue sharing, and we continue to be better by that sharing. So that's why I stay, because I think that it's really important. Not only do I love my job and I have the room to be an empathetic leader, but also I feel like it's my moral imperative to share my learnings and to teach others if they want to be taught by me.
I stay in technology because, in a very simple way, I believe in dancing with the one that brought you. And technology and work as a young woman, without kids, and going through all these different phases of my life, at every turn, work and technology and the opportunities and technology have given me an opportunity to level up in some sort of way. It could be saying, Mom, I can pay for this flight now. Or maybe the first time I took my mom to, I paid for a vacation for my mom in my 20s. And it was horrible because we had to sleep in the same bed. But it's just those little moments in life that being in technology has, given me, a sense of confidence, a sense of belief that I am connecting with people, not because of superficial reasons, but because there's an interest in what I have to offer. And for me, that was super important. I started modeling when I was a kid, and I quickly stopped, because I hated it. My brother did a lot better than I did. He got all of my jobs, but I just never really, that wasn't what I wanted to do, because I've always craved being a part of communities that, and being a part of something that didn't require me to be quiet, or look a certain way. I'm not good at that anyway. I'm not a super girly girl, but I stay in technology because it's given me an opportunity to have some great moments with my family and make a crazy cool impact and be a part of really cool stuff in the world. Technology, supply chain, as well as food, the food industry are a few industries that none of us can get away from, because we need those things. And so I like feeling needed.
I love what you're saying. I love what both of you have shared, because I think for somebody who's maybe in the thick of it and really isn't sure if they want to stay in tech because of XYZ, this is a really good reminder that, better days are to come. Hopefully, right? But yes, better days are to come. They are on the horizon. So thank you for sharing those stories. And it is always a good feeling when you can finally buy something, even if it's not having to buy off the dollar menu and buying your own food and being like, oh, I can splurge and I can get a Big Mac and I can big size that combo because I got my own money now. I can definitely share in that. I'm not ready to buy a vacation yet, but I can buy the Big Mac combo. So thank you for sharing that. And Danielle said they really love the end. They love the feeling, and Angie said she loved that as well. So thank you for sharing that. And so we have time for about one more question, and then we'll talk about hiring at CNN and why you both love working at CNN, although you talked about that a little bit. So let's see if we can get through this. So what is CNN doing to prioritize diverse voices and make sure that diverse stories are being told?
Katie, you want to start?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got a lot of outlets, right, for CNN Digital. I actually think that this is probably the most chatty, communicative company I've ever worked for. A lot of times maybe we over communicate, but that's not to our detriment. That's actually to our benefit, right? Because again, it's keeping the door open. It's keeping the the transparency and doing away with the legacy and moving forward in that 2020 and on perspective. We do a lot of things on the delivery and project management side, and that's a lot to do with Melissa Kohler and her ability to bring groups together and foster that sense of camaraderie and the openness and feeling like we can ask the tough questions and not that we're going to get egg on our face or that we're going to fall back and not have anyone catch us. Like, there is that sense of security. So we have quite a bit of Ask Me Anythings. And those are not anonymous. We get into a room together. It's not recorded. It's not anything. It's raw, but we can ask whatever we want to. And the expectation on the other side is that leadership answers us as as well as they can, and in a very, very proactive and neutral language as well. So we've got AMAs, we've got community of practice, where that is actually led by the individual and it's not led by our leadership. So a lot of times it's rotating responsibility, even though I think my friend Aletha is on here. She runs quite a bit of them. But this is where we all come together and we say, this is what we want to talk about. This is what's been, irking us, or this is something that we want to focus on because it's a skills gap, or it's a personal gap. And maybe this is something that I can focus on to get ahead, right? How do I build my trajectory or my vertical path? So we use that to our advantage, and we have those conversations just at our peer level alone. So we're doing that sort of skills growth and development amongst ourselves by fostering it within each other. We also do town halls where they're not just from our vertical. We are invited to town halls from other parts of the organization that showcase people of different backgrounds and of voices for the diversity panel. Then we also have book clubs. We have actual mentoring circles. We've got female technology support groups. I mean, you name it, we're a part of it. We're in it. We're trying to prioritize all of the various voices that we hear and the needs that come with that, right? It's not, again, we're not in the business of product. We're in the business of people. If you're not taking care of the people, you're not going to have a good product because nobody's going to want to work with you, or no one's going to want to finish the work, right? So we have a lot to offer at the company. You just have to know where to look. And if you don't know where to look, all you have to do is raise your hand and someone's going to point you in the right direction.
Another way that we are that we prioritize diverse voices is the recruiting pipeline. And so that's why I enjoy working with Mallory and everybody on our side of the house from an HR perspective, because oftentimes the recruiting process is not transparent and kind of closed in at other companies. But here at CNN, it is pretty transparent to the hiring manager, to quite a few people in the group. And I think the more you have transparency in the recruiting pipeline, as well as partnerships with other organizations that can help you diversify that pipeline, like Power to Fly and some other relationships that we have. Power to Fly isn't the only one, but I love the fact that our recruitment pipeline, it has prioritized diversity, so that we have those voices coming in, and we're not scrambling to identify or tokenify, which is like a new HR diversity inclusion, like tokenize someone just because we are lacking diversity. It's an effort that is both at the beginning in the pipeline phase, as well as while we're, working alongside each other. So I do, because a company is only like as good as what they do and how the impact that they make. And so it's one thing to have ERGs, but it's another thing to create a recruitment pipeline that includes diverse voices. And I do like that about CNN and working with HR and recruiting. You see that impact, the impact of, are you doing what you said is important, or what the culture that you want to shift to, what are you doing to change that? So yeah.
I love it. You're going to be really jazzed up about everything that CNN is doing, and just, the prioritization. I think it's really cool too, right? Because you're also daily confronted with everything that's happening. So it's also like you can't really ignore it, right? You have to take it all head on and understand what's out there, because it's working in the media. It's right out there in front of your face and you're dealing with it. So thank you so much. And so now to wrap up today's awesome conversation, what positions are you hiring for currently at CNN?
There's always a need for really, really good talent. So I will tell you, Kim's touched on it so much. We don't hire just because we have a need. We hire because we see the potential in that family and someone who can carry the torch forward for our beliefs and the culture that we're trying to create for ourselves, someone who can pave the way along with us. And with that, we're always needing extremely strong individuals in the delivery project management side, because we have a tremendous amount of responsibility on our shoulders. And it's a great place to work with one another in that area. So we're hiring in that regard. So if you know anyone, let us know.
Perfect. And Kim, I didn't know if you wanted to chime in here at all.
Oh no, I'm good. Katie covered it all.
Perfect. I want to make sure I didn't forget anything else. Perfect. And so I know we already talked about this a little bit, but I guess if you could summarize your experience working at CNN instead of saying your favorite part, what has been the most impactful for you working at CNN? And I'll hand it off to Kim first.
I think I'm still kind of absorbing it because I just started in December. Oftentimes people are like, what is it like? You guys are the world's, largest news or media company. And I think I'm just absorbing it. It's rewarding, absolutely. But sometimes I have to kind of like pinch myself. It's a great place to be. But I am still absorbing the fact that I work at CNN and the importance of that. And I'm glad I'm still absorbing it, because if you stop to try to take it all in at one time, that means you're probably missing an email, a Slack message, or something is blowing up somewhere. But my favorite part about working at CNN is definitely engaging with my manager, Tony. He's amazing. It's great to have a great manager, and being a part of the heartbeat of news in the world.
That was beautiful.
For me, my favorite part about working at CNN, I think that a lot of times we're stifled or stunted in our ability to make decisions for the business because we believe it comes from the above powers. And where Kim and I excel and where we have so much ability to influence the way business is done is at the team level, as well as in our organization amongst apps. We're a small but mighty group. And so we make and break, together. And the fact that we're able to make decisions and the business believes in us and puts that much faith and stock behind what we think our gut reaction and feeling to project A, B, or C is, and how we prioritize our work and how we're leading our initiatives, that's an incredible feeling. I don't know, I've never experienced that in other places, but here, their sense of trust from that level down to us, the well runs over. And so that's a beautiful, beautiful thing to experience day in and day out.
Thank you. And, as we're wrapping up, do either of you have any advice for someone who's interested in applying or for someone who's in the interview process with CNN?
I think that's a great question. And I don't get it asked enough. Like, I think we don't have the information we need because we don't ask. So some tips for interviewing at CNN and anywhere else is make sure that you research the company. And then as you research it, look at your resume and the job description and identify some ways that you can add value as well as ways that you can learn. I think people come into interviews and they're like all about what they can add and what they can do. But from an EQ perspective, we want to look for people that can add value, but can learn as well. If the culture is not mature enough to handle this part of your personality, how do you adjust? And what does it look like when it's a symbiotic relationship? So I think the best thing that one could do is research the company, look at your resume, figure out what you can add, what you can learn, and formalize all of those responses with actual examples, be it from your past or things that you would like to do. And then also interest in applying if you don't have the experience needed in the job description, and say like one little line doesn't describe you. I would encourage you to create an opportunity in your spare time to develop that skill set. I think gone are the days where we should be completely reliant upon your previous job to give you the experience you need to level up, right? And so create space in your own life to build in those hobbies, those skill sets that CNN is looking for, so that you have a portfolio with or without the last job. And that shows a lot of initiative. That's actually how I learned PHP and a couple different things. I didn't have those opportunities at work, yet I did want to move in this direction with my career. So you just create those things for yourself, those projects, be it a blog or whatever the case may be.
One thing that I always told people when I was in the sales industry is make sure that a bit of you comes through on your resume. A lot of times resumes are very cut dry, very boring, very keyword centric, and they can span anywhere from 5 to 10 pages. Cut that in half, make the highlights about you, right? And don't be afraid to let your personality shine through. I have read through a couple of resumes that I still have with me to this day because they are such good examples. They are resumes where someone has injected humor throughout their resume. And if you actually took the time to read it, then you would know that that person had a great personality that seemed really resilient, made a joke halfway through the resume to see if you were really paying attention, which further makes me believe in their commitment, right? So don't be afraid to put yourself on that paper and let it shine through. And don't also be afraid to talk about things that are outside of the job description, right? So you should tailor your resume to the job that you are going after. Don't just have one resume that is just like a one size fits all, because that doesn't exist. Every job description is different. You're going to have to be a chameleon when it comes to interviewing. So remember that different hats, different resumes, but also cut them down and make sure that you're putting you on that paper, not just your achievements, but you, right? Because at the end of the day, whoever the hiring manager is, it's going to be reading that, wants to see that. And that's really hard to gauge on a tactile piece of paper.
Thank you
Absolutely.
both so much for your insight, your time. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I am very tempted to look at that humorous resume to try to inspire some humor into my resume, because it is super cut and dry, which is really boring. So thank you. And I'm going to think about that a little bit more now. So I just want to thank you both today. I know we went a little bit over, but I really enjoyed today. And I'm so glad that all of you had a chance to join. And I hope that you all have a safe Tuesday, a safe rest of your week. And thank you so much. And thank you so much to Kim and Katie for being here and sharing their insights. Have an awesome